Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Caitlin, and on this channel I upload all sorts of different types of videos relating to true crime, education and psychology related topics. So if that sounds like something you'd enjoy and you haven't already, then please do hit that subscribe button down below and don't forget to turn on your little notification bell so you know whenever I upload a new video. And welcome to another week in uploads. I haven't done one of these in a little while and I've been preparing this one for quite some time now. So for today's case, we are kicking off True Crime Week by discussing one known as the Phillip Island murder, also known as the murder of Beth Bernard and the disappearance of Vivian Cameron. So they're both linked. It's a very interesting case and there are a lot of discussions about it online. So please, as I always say, do leave your thoughts down below because this is one of those ones where there are so many theories running about because it could really be a number of different things. But before we get started, I'm just going to zoom through my usual disclaimer that I like to include at the start of all my videos, just letting you guys know that I'm not claiming to be an expert in this case or any of the other cases that I cover over on my channel. I'm simply relaying the information I'm able to find myself through research of certain sources on the internet, and because only certain sources are accessible to me, it means I may get things wrong, leave things out or mispronounce things. I apologise if I do any of those things. I'm not trying to cause anyone any harm or an injustice. I'm simply working with the information that I have available to me. So with all that being said, let's just go ahead and get started discussing the case of the Phillip Island murder. This case takes place in Phillip Island, a popular tourist destination in Victoria, Australia, located not too far from Melbourne. The area is easily accessible over a bridge to the island and it boasts these vast and beautiful beaches as well as a lot of farmland as well, so it attracts visitors not only from across Australia but also worldwide. And this case focuses initially on a woman named Beth Bernard, who 2 years prior to the case beginning, she started working as a ranger at something called the Penguin Parade on Phillip Island, which is one of the tourist destinations that they are kind of most known for. So yeah, like I said, it's a particularly popular tourist spot, and also at this point she was living in her parents' holiday home, so her parents owned the house but they weren't living there, and this was on McPhee's Road in Rhyl on the island. So while she was working as a ranger at the Penguin Parade, Beth met another ranger named Fergus Cameron, and the Cameron family are particularly important in relation to this case. So Fergus Cameron was married and he, his siblings and all of their spouses ran a farm on the island not too far from the Penguin Parade. So in order to sort of simplify the Cameron family tree, there was Fergus Cameron and his wife Vivian, who had 2 sons together, Fergus's sister Marnie and her husband, so Fergus's brother-in-law, his name was Ian, and then Fergus's brother Donald and his wife Pamela. So the Cameron family all lived together on this large area of farmland, although they did all have their own houses on the property. So in the year following the start of Beth's job at the Penguin Parade, so in 1985, Beth Barnard decided to take up Cameron's family offer of employment, so she took up a second job working on the Cameron family farm. And it's known that not long after this point, in May of 1985, Beth and Fergus Cameron had started their secret affair. So the affair remained a secret from the other members of the Cameron family, but in some sources it's stated that Fergus's wife Vivian had actually started to suspect something was going on between the two by the end of that year. Pamela Cameron, who was Fergus's sister-in-law, had later told the authorities that in the space of her being employed on the farm, she became particularly close with Beth and she was considered pretty much as a member of the family. According to Pamela, Beth would even refer to Donald Cameron as uncle or grandpa, so it is clear that in one way or another she was particularly close with the Cameron family. But this family dynamic seemed to completely change in September of the following year. In the evening of the 22nd of September 1986, Fergus had allegedly gone to visit Beth in her home because she was feeling a bit under the weather, so he went to check up on her, where he claimed to have left her home at around 9 p.m. And if this account of that evening is accurate, Fergus Cameron was believed to be the last person to see Beth alive. Because after 23-year-old Beth had gone to bed for the night, someone had entered into her home and stabbed her. Authorities had believed that the first injury was struck while Beth was lying in bed, likely asleep or at least unsuspecting of the attack. They believed she had then attempted to get herself up out of the bed and try and defend herself against this unknown attacker. Beth was stabbed multiple times in the attack, during which her throat was slashed and her face was cut severely, and she'd also broken a tooth in the ordeal. She was found lying on the bedroom floor on her back and covered up to her chin by her bedding quilt. When the remains were examined, it was discovered that she had multiple defensive wounds across her hand, elbow and ankles, which supported the belief that she had vigorously attempted to fight off her attacker. And when she was found, her t-shirt had been pulled up towards her neck and the attacker had carved an A into her stomach. And immediately this was linked to the novel The Scarlet Letter, in which the letter A was used to brand someone as an adulterer. An autopsy led to the discovery of sperm both inside and outside of her genitalia, but the tests couldn't determine whose it had been. But according to Fergus, the pair didn't sleep together that evening when he had been at her home, and while it could possibly be from an earlier encounter, say in the previous few days, it was since made clear by Beth's friends that it seemed extremely unlikely that Beth wouldn't have showered in between these incidents. But as investigators would soon learn, the affair between Fergus and Beth would not be the end of the Cameron family's involvement in the case. So on the evening prior to Beth's murder, when Fergus had visited Beth after work, he'd arrived back at his own home around 9 p.m. When he arrived home, Fergus's sister Marnie was already inside his house talking to his wife Vivian, and it's known that the pair had each had a glass of wine. And not long after Fergus's arrival, Marnie had left and headed in the direction of her own home. According to Fergus, he and his wife then proceeded to have an argument that became rather heated, during which he suddenly confessed to Vivian of his affair with Beth. In response, Vivian was visibly angry and she proceeded to smash her wine glass against Fergus's head, hitting his ear and sort of the back of his skull, which ultimately left him with quite a few cuts. After the incident had occurred and she'd realised just how injured her husband was, she then decided she needed to take him to the nearby hospital, which wasn't too far from their home. While Fergus was being tended to at the hospital, the couple had remained sort of quiet regarding how he had sustained these injuries, but the nurses had later told the investigators that they had suspected it had been the result of some form of domestic altercation, and they specifically noted that Vivian had no injuries or cuts on her whatsoever. While they were in the hospital, the couple had called Fergus's sister Marnie and her husband to watch their sons inside their home, as the two boys were in bed by this point. Marnie and Ian arrived at the home after Vivian and Fergus had already left for the hospital, and when they'd entered the home, they found some spots of blood and sort of signs of an obvious altercation. And Marnie had later told the authorities that while she was inside the home, she came across some blood-covered clothing inside the laundry basket, as well as some bloody tissues and some blood on the bed inside of the spare room and on the kitchen bench. And in some reports that I read, it stated that the couple didn't do anything to these areas of blood. They didn't clean them, it just left them as they were. Marnie had also claimed that there was a small piece of broken glass on the floor that she'd come across just as she was leaving the house, and in fear of sort of someone injuring themselves, having stepped on it possibly, she decided to pick it up and put it in the bin, and stated that she felt the need to inform the authorities of this piece of glass she found, as it wasn't recorded later with the evidence collected at the home. The blood traces found around the home were later tested, and they couldn't confirm to be a match to anyone's blood specifically, but it was confirmed that they did match Vivian's blood type, and I'll go into a little bit more discussion about all of this blood a little bit later on. Back at the hospital, Vivian had verbally suggested to her husband that he should stay in hospital for the night, despite both Fergus and the doctor being adamant that it was completely unnecessary for the injuries that he had sustained. And so Fergus didn't end up staying at the hospital, and the couple then returned home at around midnight. Upon their return home, the couple then had a conversation addressing their relationship, and they both agreed that they weren't happy and that they were going to get a divorce. They agreed that Fergus and their sons would stay on Phillip Island in their home, and then Vivian would return back to the mainland where she would go and stay with her family. And because then neither of the couple wanted to spend the night together, they wanted to sort of cool off in their own separate environments, Vivian then took Fergus to Marnie's home on the property, and before leaving Marnie's home, she had given Vivian a couple of sleeping pills inside of an envelope, just to sort of help her get to sleep and forget the whole ordeal that had happened. It's known that at 3 a.m. Vivian had called her friend, a woman named Robin Dixon. But it had been Robin's husband, John, who had answered the phone, and she'd asked if the couple could all of a sudden go over to her home and look after her sons, because she relayed the information about the incident involving the wine glass over Fergus's head, even though that incident had happened hours before. She told them it had just happened and she needed to take him to the hospital, so could you come and look after the boys? When the couple arrived at the home, they'd seen the Camerons' Holden Kingswood sedan parked outside, and when they were inside the property, they found no sign of either Vivian or Fergus. Robin Dixon later reported that she recalled seeing a black suede handbag that she recognised as being Vivian's by the back door inside the home while they were picking up the children. But specifically going back to the car that was found outside the home. So the couple did have two vehicles that they would use. Vivian was known to typically use the Holden Kingswood sedan, but they also had a Toyota branded Land Cruiser which hadn't been on the drive at this point. When a neighbour of Beth's, Margaret McPhee, had later spoke to the authorities about the night of Beth's murder, she claimed she was woken up by the noise of a vehicle that sounded like a Land Cruiser drive past their homes at around 20 past 3 in the morning. Another neighbour of Beth's, a woman named Joyce, had also claimed that she'd witnessed a vehicle entering onto Beth's property, but this had been on the evening prior to Beth's murder at around 10 to 8 in the evening. So she claimed that it was unusual for a vehicle to be in that area, aside from obviously the ones owned by the residents on the road, and because she heard the car coming and thought that it was coming onto her drive, she decided to look out the window, which is when she saw the vehicle pulling onto Beth's drive and stop with the headlights on. She had then gone past Beth's home around 30 minutes later and didn't recall seeing the car at that point. And it's not known whose car this had been, as according to Fergus, he hadn't gone to Beth's home until later that evening, since he didn't finish work at the Penguin Parade until at the earliest 8 p.m. And on this night, Vivian Cameron, so Fergus's wife, was known to be wearing a pink mohair jumper with blue jeans and a floral scarf, and after this night, she was never seen again. At 7:45 a.m. the following morning, Robin Dixon had called Donald Cameron, Fergus's brother, and the line was engaged. So she tried to call again a short while later, although in later reports she stated that she couldn't recall exactly just how many times she'd attempted to call Donald before actually getting through successfully, but she knew it had been multiple times. When he eventually did answer the call, Robin Dixon had told Donald that she was concerned as she hadn't heard from Vivian or Fergus, and she still had the children with her, and both her and her husband needed to leave for work. And because of this, she'd ended up sending one of the children to school with one of her own children, and then Donald soon headed out to Robin Dixon's home to pick up the other child. As Donald had driven past Vivian and Fergus's home, he had seen the sedan parked on the driveway, but no sign of the Land Cruiser. When he returned home with the boy, he had told his wife of what had happened, and she grabbed the phone to ring Marnie. Marnie had already headed out to work at around 7:30 that morning, and so it was actually Fergus who'd answered the phone. After the incidents of the previous evening, Fergus was still in pain and relatively unsettled, so he passed the phone to Marnie's husband, Ian, as he believed he was much more likely to understand what Donald's wife, Pamela, was saying, trying to explain over the phone. And Ian had proceeded to explain to Pamela and in turn Donald exactly what had occurred the previous evening. Later that same day, there remained no sign of Vivian. No one heard from her, and because of this, Fergus had then become increasingly concerned as he also hadn't heard from Beth. While Ian had been out and about that day, he had driven past Fergus and Vivian's home and he saw no sign of the Toyota Land Cruiser, and he had called Donald to tell him that it was missing from the drive. Fergus had eventually asked his brother Donald and Ian to go and drive to Beth's home and check on her, as he knew that the previous evening she was ill and he also hadn't heard any sign of her or his wife, so he asked Donald and Ian to go and check on Beth. On their way to Beth's, they decided to head to Fergus's home in search of Vivian, as like I said, they still hadn't heard from her, but they found the home empty. When they arrived at Beth's home, they saw her two cars parked on the driveway and the porch light was on, but the front door was also open. It had been Donald Cameron who had first entered Beth's home and come across her body. He'd immediately then shouted for Ian, who came in to find the gruesome scene, and the pair then headed straight for the Phillip Island police station to report what they'd found. Something which a lot of people have picked up on as being strange, as rather than ringing the police, they decided to go to the police station, but regardless, that's what happened. When they had spoken to the officers trying to tell them what they had come across, it was Donald that was allegedly rambling for almost 10 minutes by telling a long and elaborate story from the beginning of everything, before then being encouraged to get to the point as to why they were at the police station. And in response, all he had told them was that Beth was not well. At a later point, it was reported that some of the law enforcement officials who had been involved in taking the men's statement regarding this incident had found it extremely strange just how calm and collected they both were. One of them had even said, and I quote, "You'd think these blokes discovered bodies every day of their lives." Back at Marnie's home, after Fergus had sent his relatives out to check on Beth, he was still worried about not being able to get a hold of her, and so he decided to ring his sister Marnie at work. When she'd answered the phone, Fergus had then asked her to ring Beth, so she hung up the call with Fergus and rang Beth, and when she found no answer at Beth's home, she rang Fergus back and informed him of such, before then deciding to leave work and head back to her brother. While both Marnie and Fergus were in Marnie's home, a man named Dr. Paul Flood had turned up, as he had since been informed of the discovery at Beth's home. So this man owned a medical practice nearby in New Haven, and so he was the one sent to sort of deliver the news. On this same day, the remaining family members were informed of Beth's death, including Donald's wife Pamela. After hearing the news, Pamela had decided to head home from her workplace in San Remo just after 4 p.m, but on her journey home, she spotted the missing Toyota Land Cruiser parked next to a playground in New Haven. And the specific location of the car was parked particularly close to the bridge that connected Phillip Island to San Remo. And upon discovering the vehicle, Pamela pulled over and decided to search it. She found the car to be unlocked with the windows open and the keys still in the ignition. There was a black suede handbag on the front seat next to a gold-coloured purse, as well as there being 2 packs of Claridge branded cigarettes and a lighter inside the car, which was specifically a cigarette brand that Vivian was known to smoke. She also found another set of keys inside the car, as well as a carving knife and a washcloth covered in blood. After searching the vehicle, Pamela had removed the purse from inside the car, she had taken the keys from the ignition and locked it behind her. Not long after this, John Dixon, who had been the man who looked after the children on the night of Beth's murder with his wife, had told the authorities that around 3 p.m. that same day, he had driven past the Land Cruiser in that same spot where Pamela had stumbled across it. And the discovery of this car in this particular location and in the condition that it was found in immediately prompted investigators to search the bridge and the surrounding areas for any sign of disturbance, but they found nothing in this sense to suggest a suicide had occurred, although it wasn't ruled out. When word spread of the discovery, a local resident named Wayne Hunt had come forward and claimed that he had seen a car parked in the same spot at around 5 a.m. while he was on his way to work. According to Hunt, it had struck him as unusual, as he would virtually never see any cars parked in that area at that time of the morning, and he'd initially put it down to just a passing driver having pulled over to use the public restrooms at the nearby playground. He'd stated though that he hadn't paid close enough attention to make a conscious note of the brand of car or the type, but simply that he recalled seeing one parked in that spot at around 5 a.m. So when the authorities were searching into Beth Bernard's personal life, they discovered a few things that were considered of interest. Her friends had informed them that she had expressed to them that she was unhappy with her relationship with Fergus and that she was planning on confronting him with an ultimatum, as she no longer wanted to be in the relationship while he was married. In a few sources that I read, there were references to a secret admirer of Beth's, a man who would turn up at her home while she was at work and would sit outside in his car after dark watching her home. Her friends claimed that over a period of a few months, this secret admirer would leave Beth expensive flowers on her doorstep every few days, and he would take it upon himself to mow her grass while she was out of the house. And according to Beth's friends, at first she sort of made a joke of it, but then she allegedly had openly confronted him about specifically mowing her lawn while she was out, and she stated to her friends that he got really pissed off in response to her confronting him. She had told them that a few days after this confrontation, the man had showed up at her home again and had got mad, and at some point had even spent a day following her around her work on the Cameron farm. It's known that following Beth's death, this admirer was particularly distraught, and he'd sent in an obituary notice into a Melbourne newspaper. There had also been another man who had shown some romantic interest in Beth just prior to her death, and this had been a man named Michael Latham, who had initially been an employee at the Penguin Parade, but he had then also gone on to work at the Cameron family farm as well. A close friend of Beth's, who had also worked at the Penguin Parade, had told the investigators that just a few days before her death, Beth had told Michael of the affair that she was having with Fergus Cameron. According to this friend, Beth had done so in an attempt to make it clear to Latham that she had interests elsewhere that she wasn't trying to lead him on. But when Michael Latham was asked regarding this, he claimed that Beth had told him of her relationship with Fergus over a month before that. So people's opinions are divided whether this should have been sort of chased up more, especially as Michael's reaction to being told this information about the affair is unknown. So could he have reacted badly and been jealous of her relationship with Fergus? There's a lot of discussion regarding that. In terms of other sightings potentially linked, there was a statement sent in by a witness to the authorities that claimed that this witness had seen someone driving an AG motorcycle, one that is typically used in agricultural work, at around 5:30 a.m. in the morning that Beth was killed. This witness had placed this sighting as being on an intersection coming from the direction of San Remo, and they had noticed specifically that it had no headlights on. They couldn't see the individual's face, so it would be nearly impossible for them to identify them, but they recalled them wearing an oilskin coat. The witness had unintentionally followed this motorcycle sort of on their own journey, but they didn't see him pass the point of a road called Back Beach Road. And another witness later came forward and claimed to have seen a matching AG motorcycle on the back of the Land Cruiser owned by the Cameron family. In terms of information on Vivian Cameron specifically, she was described by friends and colleagues as an extremely devoted mother who had previously spoken of leaving the island with her sons as she was unhappy in her relationship. And so it appeared to strike a lot of them as very strange that if she had, say, committed suicide as one of the potential scenarios was being considered, why would she not leave a note, especially one written to her sons? And then it was discovered that at approximately 10 a.m. on the 23rd of September, some hours after Vivian was considered missing, she had allegedly phoned her friend Glenda Frost. According to Frost, this conversation had been entirely ordinary, with Vivian even mentioning a patchwork sewing pattern to her. But Glenda informed authorities that during the phone call she could hear voices in the background coming from Vivian's end of the phone call, with Vivian then proceeding to shush them. And this account of the phone call occurring was supported by a friend of Glenda's who was staying with her at the time and had heard the majority of the conversation. But it seemed that the authorities had moved ahead under the assumption that Glenda must have been confused regarding the date in which this conversation occurred. It seems that differing opinions in this case occur because of the physical evidence or lack thereof in relation to the case. As I previously mentioned, there was somewhat a consideration into Vivian's blood type, as it was known that she had a type A blood type, while Fergus and Beth both had type O. There was a drop of blood found inside Beth's home on the pathway, on a towel at Beth's home, and on a piece of cloth inside the Land Cruiser, all confirmed to be type A blood. Blood found on the tissues inside the Cameron home were type O, presumably linked to Fergus's injuries during the wine glass incident. There had also been a small amount of blood found inside the sink inside Beth's bathroom and cigarette butts found around the scene, something that was somewhat unexpected as it's known that Beth wasn't a smoker. But some years later, these were tested and it was confirmed that these contained traces of Vivian's DNA. According to some reports, there had been some traces of blood linked to Vivian on a towel in Beth's bathroom, but when the blood on Beth's legs on her remains were tested, it was confirmed to only have been hers. A later re-examination of the evidence at the crime scene found that Vivian's blood was found on the handle of the knife collected at the scene, but it was disputed that this knife may not have been the murder weapon, as the evidence on the remains suggested that a different type of knife was used because the wounds were in a rather unusual and specific sort of shape. And in terms of Vivian's believed suicide, the water was searched thoroughly by the investigators and they found no sign of suicide having occurred, but this remains a huge mystery as Vivian Cameron still remains missing. So moving on to some of the questions regarding the evidence that was found. There remains no sign of a murder weapon, as none of the knives found in Beth's home, nor the knife found in the abandoned Land Cruiser matched the marks found on the remains. Is it possible that the knives found at the scene and in the Land Cruiser were planted? It seems unlikely that there would just happen to be two different weapons found in both of the locations, but neither were the murder weapon. There were some reports that stated that the hospital staff found no sign of any glass in any of Fergus's cuts following the argument that he'd had with Vivian, and the only evidence of said wine glass smashing had been Marnie's claim of her finding that small piece of glass on the floor in the home. The amount of locations in which Vivian's blood was found was rather confusing, especially since she had not been reported as having any injuries while at the hospital the previous evening with her husband. Some have said that it struck them as unusual that Fergus had not gone to check on Beth himself that morning, but rather sent his brother and his brother-in-law to check on his mistress. The reports of Donald and Ian being particularly calm and collected while reporting the discovery of Beth's body also do seem quite unusual. According to Vivian's friend Robin, who had collected the children in the early hours of the morning, she had seen Vivian's handbag by the back door inside the home at around 3 a.m, but there had been no sign of Vivian at that point. So why would Vivian then return to retrieve her handbag for it then to be left inside the abandoned Land Cruiser at roughly 5 a.m? And Glenda Frost's claim of a phone call later that day appears to raise even more questions. I think there's a lot of confusion regarding that whole report. But yes, that is where I'm going to end the video. So like I said, this is a rather confusing case, and there are some potential scenarios. Mostly it seems to be people either believe that Vivian Cameron had been responsible for Beth's murder and then either had disappeared or committed suicide, or could it have been that Vivian had gone to Beth's to confront her about the affair, but they'd both fallen victim to someone else? It's not known, but I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you found this interesting, and I will see you guys tomorrow for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye.